1. So this happened to me and my best friend when we were in high school. We live in the lovely state of Hawaii, and would often go to the beach, a short walk from my house when she stay over. To give a brief description of us, we're both fair-skinned females, blondish and brown hair, and have light-colored eyes. We both look pretty similar, except she has corkscrew curls. People would ask us if we were sisters while we were growing up. This is slightly important for later on in the story. Anyway, a good portion of where I grew up was good old Eva Beach, deep into Eva, like Howe Bush. If anyone knows what that is or has heard of it, you know where I'm talking about. For the rest, it's an area where homeless druggies, buyers and sellers, tend to hang out, and the beach is actually quite rocky. If you head up to the beach, though, there's less rocks and less people. That nicer area of the beach is the part that's closer to my house. And where we usually would go, kind of like a secret beach location. But not really if you lived in that particular area. So one weekend, my friend Jessica and I were hanging out at my house. We decided to go hang out at the beach and tan, do whatever. This particular day, though, we had decided that instead of walking to the slightly less rocky beach, we'd go to the secret beach, near White Plains, no rocks, not too many people, nicer waves, more beach. It was about a 10 to 15 minute drive since it was like the next neighborhood, next to Eva, and thought, what the hell, why not? We get to the beach, there's not a lot of people, it's a lovely day, and we put our stuff down and just start chilling. Then it happens. Jessica and I had been there maybe all of 20 minutes when we're approached by a man who was maybe about 30 or 40 years old. Average build, dark hair, and a bit of facial hair, if I remember. There was nothing about him at first to give us any creepy vibes. He was a local, and it's not uncommon for strangers to come up to each other on the beach and talk story or ask something. So we thought nothing of it when the man introduced himself as Dave. However, after his polite intro, he then proceeded to tell us he was a journalist and reporter for a well-known local newspaper, and he was doing an article about tourists and their thoughts on less-known beaches. Jessica and I immediately gave each other that side look. Like, something isn't right here. That sentence alone made us suspicious for a couple reasons. One, he had no camera, notebook, pen, or anything to indicate he was taking notes for his story. He was also just wearing swim trunks, not really a professional appearance. 2, there was a report on the news around that time that young girls were being conned into modeling agencies and being approached by men on beaches, the mall, anywhere where tourists or locals were known to frequent, and being kidnapped into human trafficking. 3, he had not given us any proof that he in fact worked at said newspaper, or that his name really was Dave, like a business card. Because of this, we decided we weren't going to trust anything this guy said. I'd also like to note that while we were in a secret spot, it wasn't a spot that a lot of tourists really know about or even go to. They like to go to the beaches near their hotels, or the ones they've read or heard about, and wouldn't drive all the way there. Really, it's where locals hang out. This is kind of where our descriptions come into play, because I was born and raised there even if I didn't look like it, and so was Jessica. It would be pretty easy to mistake us for dumb tourists. Anyway, so Dave says he's writing this story, right? He then asks us what our names are and is starting to look at me and Jessica up and down, almost like he's memorizing what we look like and sizing us up. Never in my life have I gotten such major stranger danger vibes from a guy, and proceeded to give him some fake name off the top of my head. Jessica follows suit. This is where it starts to get even creepier and uncomfortable. After a brief pause and more intense staring, Dave proceeds to say, "Are you girls hungry? I got food in my barbecue at my van if you wanted to hang out." This dude said van and points to his open green-colored kidnapper van. Instantly, red flags are flapping in the hurricane like winds of our instincts. Why in the world would two 15 to 16-year-olds want to hang out with a middle-aged man? It was almost like the teen version of asking you if you wanted candy. You just had to hop into the van. Dave wasn't even asking us questions about the beach and how we heard about it. In fact, it was like he completely forgot the reason why he was there and just really wanted us to go into his van with him. We told him we were okay and thanks for the offer, hoping he would leave us alone. Dave wasn't going to take no for an answer. He kind of got a look on his face like he was surprised we had turned him down, and then got more forceful. "Are you sure? I got chicken and some drinks. It will be fun," he said, hoping we'd cave if he kept being persistent. Again we told him no, and he decided to leave us alone for now, only to walk to his van, sit, and watch us lying on the beach. It was really unsettling to have him stare at us like that, like he was waiting to see what we would do. More so because we were two young girls in bikinis by ourselves in a somewhat closed-off beach. There was a group of guys that wasn't too far from us, military guys, pretty easy to tell, and Jessica and I decided to go and talk to them. Plus, we felt a little safer knowing that we weren't alone on the beach with this guy. So we walked up to the group and we asked them if Dave had come over to them and had asked them questions regarding this story. The guys looked at us, then looked at Dave, and said he hadn't approached them at all, and they'd been on the beach for a while before us. Jessica and I took this as a sign that it was time to pack up and go home. Dave was still watching us. He had seen our interaction with the dudes, as we came back and gathered up our things and walked off towards my truck. We didn't immediately walk straight to my truck, and we kind of walked past it to see if Dave had packed up his stuff and start following us. I was parked along the road and had the trees blocking the beach on one side, so if anyone decided they wanted to snatch you up off the road, you couldn't see it from the beach. Luckily, we didn't see him, and we left, checking my rear-view mirror in case I saw a suspicious van follow me back to my house. On the way back, Jessica asked me if I had gotten that gut feeling the same time he had said he was working for the newspaper. I said I did, and we both told each other the exact same things that made us feel that way. It was almost like we had read each other's minds and were seeing the exact same thing. Really eerie. I think what made the experience all the more unnerving was that he seemed to be looking for specific targets. He hadn't asked the guys anything, so he was definitely looking for girls. Who knows, maybe he could have been a human trafficker and was trying to either get one or both of us into that van. I've never been back to that particular area of White Plains since. I almost wonder what would have happened if that group of guys wasn't there, or if we hadn't listened to our gut. 2. So this happened about 3 years ago when I was a sophomore in college. I just moved into my very first apartment with my best friend Ron. On par with most first apartments, it was the cheapest 4 walls and a roof we could afford. With that being said, we were witness to a lot of questionable activities, as our complex was home to a fair amount of, eccentric people. Yet the freedom of having our very own place is exhilarating, and acted as a sort of counterbalance to the shenanigans that were commonplace in our new community. In any case, we made sure to be vigilant and to keep our doors locked. Well, most of the time. It was a Monday around 2 in the afternoon, and I was just getting back from my morning string of classes. Ron dabbles in gamer culture and would usually be going to bed when I got up, around 9 a.m., so he was dead asleep. I was in sort of a rush as I had to finish up a paper for my 4 p.m. class, so I went swiftly to my room. I pulled out my laptop, plugged in my headphones, and began to type away. After about 30 minutes of typing, ABBA blaring in my ears, I noticed my door begin to open. The movement was lethargic and cautious, yet it stopped abruptly after the door had opened about an inch wide. More specifically, after I took notice. Unable to see anything through the open sliver, I became inquisitive. Assuming it's Ron, I call out, "What?" No response. "What do you want?" Still no response. "Bro, what the fuck do you want?" The door remained cracked as I demanded answers until my annoyance became clear and my tone began to change. Then it methodically closed as slowly as it was opened. So slow, in fact, it almost didn't latch. Still under the assumption it's Ron, I begin to get even more annoyed. Ron and I have a colorful relationship, so we frequently yell and swear at each other. "Bro, seriously, what the fuck do you want? I'm trying to write a paper." I tell him to stop messing around and tell me what he wants. After about the third yell, something makes my heart sink to my stomach. Bells began to ring in my head, and my gut is convinced something is wrong. It wasn't like Ron to mess with me like that, and even if he did decide to break the habit, he would have come back and done his "it's just a prank, bro" routine long before I started yelling. I sprung up from my bed, heart racing, blood pumping, adrenaline flowing. I reach under my pillow and grasp the cold metal sheath of the M7 bayonet my dad had bought me some odd years ago. Everyone made fun of me for sleeping with it. But look who's laughing now. I take the blade out and begin to move toward the door, cautiously calling out to Ron one last time to make sure my paranoia isn't getting the best of me. "All right, Ron, do you need something?" Greeted with silence yet again, I take that as my cue to exit the room. I grasp the doorknob and begin to twist ever so slowly, my stomach twisting right alongside it. With a distinctive click, the door unlatches, and I begin to tenderly open it. As soon as there's enough room, I peer my head out into the hallway. Nothing. I finally step out, and as my body crosses the threshold from room to hallway, my adrenaline spikes. Knife in hand, I make my way to the living room with a simultaneous sense of cautiousness and urgency. I make the 15-feet journey to the living room and do a scan of the area. Nothing. Upon seeing the empty, quiet living room, my body immediately relaxes. My grip on the handle of the bayonet loosens, allowing my knuckles to go from a ghostly white back to their normal pink fleshy color. However, my moment of relief was short-lived, as something dawned on me. The living room was empty, as in devoid of human presence. I turn back to the hallway and sprint to Ron's door. Unafraid to forgo common courtesy, I barge right in. As the door swings open and I take my first steps inside, I'm once again met with a gut-wrenching feeling and a modest spike of adrenaline. Ron was dead asleep. With a mix of yelling and shaking, I finally wake him up. A very groggy and pissed Ron mumbles, "What?" over my franticness. Already knowing the answer, I ask one question out of denial and hope. "Did you open my door a couple minutes ago?" "No, what?" As the sound of the most hated word in the English language fell upon my ears, I was already halfway out Ron's room. As I re-entered the living room, I gave things a second look. Upon further inspection, I noticed the absence of my Xbox, my roommate's PS4, and my roommate's backpack, filled with expensive college textbooks, and his laptop. I sprint out the front door and up the stairs and to the outside of my complex, desperately trying to see someone carrying a backpack and or game consoles. I run the perimeter and find nothing. Defeated, I make my way back to the apartment and find Ron standing in the living room, still groggy and very much confused. I explain the situation we now find ourselves in. We called the cops, who took our statements and nothing more. The interactions we had with the PD is another long story, one filled with the worst instances of incompetence and stupidity I've ever seen. But to sum them up, the person who opened my door that day was never arrested. This is in spite of the fact that it is considered felony home invasion, since Ron and I were home, and my father literally figured out who did it. So unless it's to give me back my Xbox or Ron his PS4 and backpack, let's not meet again. 3. I think my high school best friend was involved in a murder. We'll call her Sam. All throughout high school, and even for a bit afterwards, we were best friends. Even though we were best friends, I felt like I didn't really know her, if that makes sense. We were pretty wild teenagers, drinking, smoking, hanging out with older guys. Ew, I know. Etc. Sam always dated super sketchy guys. When we were 16, Sam started dating a 27-year-old named John. Disgusting, I know. I had my fair share of dating guys way too old for me as well, though, so I didn't see anything wrong with it. Also, predators have a special way of making you feel like there's nothing wrong with what they're doing. I have my fair share of trauma due to older men from that time in my life. but that's a story for another time. She didn't have a car at the time, so she would regularly ask me to drop her off at his place, to hang out and cover for her if her mom contacted me. Because this relationship was obviously hidden from her mom. Being an idiot teenager, I was like, yeah, sure, whatever, she's my homegirl, and I know she'd do the same for me. Plus, I'd met John several times before, and he seemed decent enough at the time. Please keep in mind that I was also a teenager at that time, and obviously, I realize that he's a predator now. He would give us alcohol and stuff, and would invite us over to party with his equally disgusting friends. Their relationship seemed fine at first, but it turned toxic within a few months. I mean, duh, he was a grown man manipulating a little girl. He would constantly demand to track her phone location and control what she wore. He also cheated on her multiple times, but she always stayed. During the time this happened, I stopped driving her to see him. One time she called me begging me to drive her to see him. I said no. She went on to explain that he was drunk, and if I wouldn't, then he would pick her up, and if they got in a crash due to drunk driving, it would be my fault. So I drove her to his house. I was furious with John at this point for hurting my best friend, and had a rebellious teenage didn't-care attitude. So as soon as I walked into his house to drop Sam off, I started screaming at him for being manipulative. His response and the dark, twisted, yet emotionless look in his eyes still gives me chills to this day. I could break your neck so easily. Thankfully, I was standing right by the front door, so I ran out to my car and immediately sped off. The next couple of years were kind of fuzzy. Also, I asked Sam to stop talking to me about John, because I was sick of hearing about him. But basically, they were constantly breaking up and getting back together. Sam dated a string of other guys, but would always cheat on them with John. When we were 18, this is when things started getting progressively weirder, and I started to distance myself from Sam because of it. Long story short, Sam had a new boyfriend who she seemed crazy about, and I was so relieved because she finally seemed over John. Then she heard through the grapevine that John got engaged, and she became irate. We were hanging out when she heard the news, and she was just like, I just have to go home and process this. So she immediately left, and I was like, whatever, I'll give her space. She calls me a few hours later, and was talking super fast and laughing a lot. I was like, you good? She was like, yeah, I just broke into John's apartment and smashed all his shit. I know that I have this new guy I'm dating, but I've been hooking up with John still. Don't hate me, and I'm sorry I didn't tell you. But anyway, I feel so great. I broke his TV and cut up all his sheets. Too bad John and his fiancée weren't home. I'd never seen her act like this before, and was so alarmed. What would she have done if they were home? The break-in was never reported to the police because she told John it was her, and if he went to the police, John's fiancée would have found out he was cheating on her with Sam. Now at this point, a smart person would completely cut her off. But I didn't. I stopped hanging out with her as much, and we naturally grew a bit distant, because I had moved across the country for college, but we would text and FaceTime every couple of weeks. So at this point you're probably thinking, okay, so what about the murder? Hang tight, we're almost there. 2018, John's fiancée was found dead. The police immediately ruled it as a suicide because there was a note, and the gun was found in her hand. But all of her friends and family insisted she would never do that. I know this because I had a few mutual friends with his fiancée, and it was understandably all that anyone could talk about. She was known to everyone as being extremely positive and cheerful. They pressured the cops to investigate more, and lo and behold, 1 year later, John was found guilty of murdering her. Thanks for that, cops. He's currently in prison, and it chills me to the bone knowing that I was in his house on multiple occasions, and used to frequently hang out with him. So now moving on to why I think my friend may have had something to do with it. Last year, she was visiting my city and asked to meet up for dinner. I was like, sure, why not? We're gonna be in public, and I do miss her, and it'd be nice to catch up. While we were at dinner, She had her phone on the table, and I saw a call from the name Jail ringing into her phone. She quickly excused herself to take the call and was gone for multiple minutes. When she got back, I was like, WTF? She explained that she visits John in prison regularly, and they talk on the phone every day. I was like, why? He was found guilty of murder. Why would you want anything to do with him? And she looked me dead in the eyes with a look of pure evil and malice and said, I'm the only one who knows what actually happened. Nobody else knows the truth. I quickly changed the subject and finished my dinner really quickly and made an excuse to leave. I was terrified at this point and had no idea what she was capable of. I hightailed it back to my apartment and blocked her on everything. I haven't spoken to her since. I know this isn't solid proof she was involved, but her past behavior, the break-in, coupled with that chilling comment and the fact that she regularly visited a convicted murderer in prison, leads me to believe she had something to do with it. At the very least, she knows more than she's admitting. Sam, let's never fucking meet again. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 512. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Also, before I forget, I'd like to give a shout out to SadRadDad69, the author of the final story there. Thank you very much for letting me use your story. Well, that last story was quite the roller coaster. Creepy bugger will be asking for conjugal visits next. Yuck. You know, every now and again, I get the urge to watch serial killer documentaries. Oddly, it seems, I don't know what it is. Just while I was narrating that last story, it kind of popped into my head. I don't know what it is. It's always the summer time. I don't know what it is about the summer, but it makes me want to learn about creepy people. So I'm probably going to do that next. Although one thing I do hate, and I was tweeting about this the other day, is I hate biopics focusing on serial killers. Because it's one thing to make a documentary, depending on the documentary, because some of them are sensationalist. It's one thing to relay factual information and recount events. You know, so people know what happened and perhaps we can learn from it in some way. And it's another thing to make 2 movies and 2 documentaries or 3 documentaries, whatever it is, about Ted Bundy in the space of a year. That kind of thing annoys me. Although there is apparently a documentary about the Golden State Killer coming out soon. It's based on Michelle McNamara's book, which I did buy the book. I've got the audiobook version of it. I haven't actually listened to it yet, so I'll need to do that. And there is a documentary apparently coming out about that. So I'll probably check that out whenever it's out, providing it's done with taste and care. I mean, by all accounts, the book seems to have been. Okay, I'm going to stop rambling now and head off. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.